Daddy, the word hung in the air like a question mark shaped from hope alone. Lucy Maddox's lips formed the sound carefully, deliberately, the way a sculptor might shape clay without ever seeing the final form. Her voice was soft, tentative, reaching out into a world she had never truly experienced. Bruce Maddox heard it, but Lucy didn't. She couldn't hear anything. Not the rustle of her father's leather jacket as he turned toward her. Not the gentle creak of the floorboards beneath his boots. Not even the sound of her own voice calling out to him. For 6 years, Lucy had lived in absolute silence. Bruce, Iron Hand, Maddox stood in the doorway of their small Reno home, watching his 6-year-old daughter try to navigate a world that existed only in silence. His jaw tightened, not from anger, not from frustration, but from a pain so deep, so profound, that it had carved permanent lines into his weathered face. This was a man who'd survived decades in the Hells Angels. A man who carried scars from fights, highways, and losses that would have broken most people. Bruce Maddox wasn't easily shaken, but watching his daughter live in silence, that shook him every single day. Lucy tilted her head slightly to the right, the way she always did when the discomfort came. Her small fingers reached up, tapping gently against her ear, trying to ease some invisible pressure that had been there for as long as anyone could remember. She winced, just barely, but Bruce caught it. He caught everything. He'd spent thousands of dollars trying to fix this. Audiologists, specialists, neurologists, ENT doctors with impressive credentials and even more impressive bills. They'd all taken his money. They'd all run their tests. They'd all offered their theories. Nerve damage, some said. Congenital defect. Others suggested developmental delay. Structural abnormality. The medical jargon came fast and clinical, but the answers never did. Every appointment ended the same way, with shrugs, apologies, and another referral to yet another specialist who couldn't help. By the time Lucy turned 6, Bruce had seen 17 different specialists. He'd spent over $40,000 on appointments, tests, scans, and consultations. He'd traveled to San Francisco, Los Angeles, even Seattle, chasing recommendations and second opinions from doctors who claimed to be the best in their field. Every single one of them looked at Lucy's ear. Every single one of them missed what mattered. What they didn't know, what none of them could have known, was that every specialist failed to see what a 10-year-old boy would spot in seconds. 3 miles across Reno, another child was fighting a completely different battle, one of survival. Tom didn't remember his mother's face anymore. Not clearly, anyway, just fragments. The warmth of her hand holding his. The sound of her humming songs he could no longer name. The way she'd stroke his hair when thunder scared him at night. What he did remember with painful clarity was the night the shelter caught fire. He was 7 years old. The smoke alarm screamed through the building, pulling families from their cots and mattresses, sending everyone scrambling toward the exits in panic. Tom remembered his mother pushing him forward, her hands firm on his shoulders, guiding him through the chaos toward safety. He made it out. She didn't. They told him it was smoke inhalation. They told him she didn't suffer. They told him a lot of things that were supposed to make a 7-year-old feel better about losing the only person who'd ever loved him. None of it helped. His father lasted another 8 months. 8 months of showing up drunk, then not showing up at all. 8 months of broken promises and empty apologies, until one morning Tom woke up in their motel room and his father was just gone. No note, no explanation, no would-be, just gone. Tom was 8 years old, and he was completely alone. Most kids would have panicked, would have gone to authorities, to child services, to anyone who might help. But Tom had learned early that the system didn't always work the way people claimed it did. He'd seen other kids disappear into foster care, bouncing from home to home, their eyes growing harder with each move. So Tom made a different choice. He chose to survive on his own terms. He didn't beg. Something in him, pride maybe, or his mother's voice still echoing in his memory, refused to hold out his hand and ask for pity. He didn't steal either. His mother had taught him better than that. Instead, Tom learned to help. He'd hover near diners during the morning rush, offering to bus tables or sweep floors in exchange for breakfast. He'd linger behind barber shops, helping elderly barbers carry out trash or sweep up hair clippings, earning a few dollars and sometimes a sandwich. He'd find food stalls at the edge of parking lots and volunteer to help vendors pack up at the end of the day, receiving whatever didn't sell. He lived in the corners of life, the spaces between buildings, the alleys behind restaurants, the park benches that nobody else wanted. He kept himself clean as best he could, using gas station bathrooms. He wore the same faded cargo shorts and hand-me-down shirts until they were threadbare. And he learned to be invisible. When you're homeless and 10 years old, invisibility is survival. You don't draw attention. You don't make noise. You simply exist quietly, hoping nobody notices you long enough to ask questions you can't answer. But here's what happened. When Tom became invisible to everyone else, he started seeing things other people missed. Tom had a gift nobody knew about, a gift born from desperation. He could read pain in people's faces. He'd spent so long being invisible that he'd learned to see what others missed. The slight wince of an old woman with arthritis. The way a construction worker favored his left leg. The exhaustion in a waitress's eyes after a double shift. Tom saw suffering because he knew it intimately. 6 months earlier, behind a diner on 4th Street, he'd noticed an elderly man sitting on a milk crate, tilting his head and tapping his ear in obvious discomfort. Tom had approached carefully, the way he always did, and asked if the man was okay. "Something stuck in there," the old man had muttered. "Been driving me crazy for days." Tom had looked, and there, just visible in the ear canal, was a hardened mass of wax and debris compacted so tightly it had become a blockage. Tom had seen similar things before. His mother had once helped a neighbor with the same problem, using warm water and patience. He'd helped the old man that day, carefully, gently, and when the blockage finally came free, the relief on the man's face was immediate. Tom never forgot that moment, and that memory, that one random act of kindness behind a greasy diner, was about to save a little girl's world. The park on West 5th Street wasn't much. A few swings with rusted chains, a slide that had seen better decades, patchy grass that turned brown every summer and barely recovered by fall. But it was quiet, and on that particular Tuesday afternoon in late September, it was exactly what Bruce needed. He pulled his truck into the gravel lot, killed the engine, and looked over at Lucy in the passenger seat. She was already unbuckling herself, her eyes bright with excitement at the prospect of an afternoon outside. Bruce managed a small smile. This was all he wanted, just one good day. One afternoon where his daughter could feel joy without the weight of her silence pressing down on both of them. Lucy ran ahead toward the swings, her red dress catching the sunlight, her small feet kicking up dust as she moved. Bruce followed at a slower pace, his boots heavy on the ground, his mind still turning over the latest failed doctor's appointment from 3 days earlier. He was tired. Not physically, but tired in the way that comes from years of trying and failing. Tired of hope that led nowhere. 20 feet away, sitting on a worn wooden bench near the basketball court, Tom watched them arrive. He'd been there for about an hour, his usual spot when he needed somewhere to rest during the day. The park was safe. Families came and went. Nobody paid attention to a quiet kid on a bench. As long as he didn't cause trouble, didn't approach anyone, didn't draw attention, he could sit there for hours without anyone asking questions. Tom had learned to occupy himself by observing. Watching people became both entertainment and education. He'd study how families interacted, how parents responded to their children, how people moved through the world with the casual confidence that came from having a home to return to. He noticed everything. So when Lucy walked past him toward the swings, Tom noticed immediately the way her head tilted slightly to the right, the casual, almost unconscious movement of her hand reaching up to tap at her ear, the exact angle of discomfort he'd seen before. Tom sat up straighter. Lucy climbed onto the swing, her father pushing her gently from behind. She smiled, but every few seconds, her hand would drift back to her right ear. The tapping, the gentle pressure she applied with her fingertips, trying to ease something nobody else seemed to notice. Tom's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward on the bench, watching more carefully now. The sunlight hit Lucy's face at just the right angle as she turned her head. And that's when Tom saw it. Deep inside her ear canal, barely visible, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. A dark mass. Compacted. Lodged firmly. The kind of blockage that wouldn't come out on its own. The kind that could cause pressure, discomfort, and, if it was positioned just right against the eardrum, complete hearing loss. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He knew exactly what that was. He'd seen it before. He'd removed one before. And suddenly, with a clarity that sent electricity through his entire body, he understood. This little girl wasn't just uncomfortable. She was deaf because of that blockage. And nobody, not her father, not the doctors, not anyone, had seen it. Tom's heart started pounding. His hands gripped the edge of the wooden bench until his knuckles turned white. He could help her. He knew he could. It would take 30 seconds. Maybe less. One careful extraction, and that little girl could hear for the first time in who knows how long. But Tom also knew what would happen if he approached her. He'd spent 2 years learning to be invisible precisely because approaching people, especially children, when you looked like he did was dangerous. The father was right there. A big man. Intimidating. The kind of man who wouldn't hesitate to protect his daughter from a strange barefoot kid with scraped knees and unwashed clothes. If Tom approached her, the man might grab him, might hurt him, might call the police. And then what? Foster care. Questions he couldn't answer. The end of his freedom. But if he didn't approach her, that little girl would stay deaf forever. When the solution was right there, when he could fix it in seconds, Tom's heart started racing. He knew exactly what was wrong, but he also knew what would happen if he approached a biker's daughter uninvited. He had seconds to decide. Stay safe and invisible, or risk everything to help. Tom's decision came in the space between heartbeats. One moment, he was frozen on that bench, paralyzed by fear and self-preservation. The next, his body was moving before his mind could talk him out of it. He jumped up, his bare feet hitting the dusty ground with purpose. Lucy had stepped off the swing and was wandering toward the slide, her hands still drifting to her ear every few seconds. She was maybe 15 feet away from Tom now, moving in that casual, aimless way children do when they're exploring their surroundings. Tom started walking toward her. His heart hammered so violently in his chest he thought it might crack his ribs. Every survival instinct he'd honed over 2 years of living on the streets screamed at him to stop, to sit back down, to stay invisible. But he kept walking. Lucy turned slightly, noticing the boy approaching. She tilted her head, curious but not afraid. She couldn't hear his footsteps, couldn't hear the urgency in his breathing. She just saw another kid, barefoot and skinny, moving toward her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Bruce saw too. The reaction was immediate and primal. Bruce's body shifted between Tom and Lucy before conscious thought even registered. His hand came up, palm out, a barrier of flesh and authority. "Hey!" Bruce's voice cut through the afternoon air like a blade. "Back up!" Tom stopped immediately, his hands raised slightly, showing he meant no harm. But he didn't back away. His eyes were locked on Lucy, specifically on her right ear, and the urgency in his face was unmistakable. "I'm sorry," Tom said quickly, his voice higher than he wanted it to be, cracking slightly with nervousness. "I'm sorry, but please." "I said back up, kid." Bruce's tone left no room for negotiation. He was a full foot taller than Tom, broader, harder. A man who'd spent decades making people listen when he spoke. But Tom shook his head, the movement quick and desperate. "Please," he repeated. And this time, there was something in his voice that made Bruce hesitate. Not fear, not manipulation, just raw, genuine concern. "Something's in her ear. I can see it. I think I can help." Bruce's jaw tightened. This was Reno. Homeless kids approach people all the time with stories, with angles, with reasons why you should give them money or attention or trust. Bruce had heard them all. He'd developed a thick skin against sob stories and manipulation. But this kid wasn't asking for money, wasn't even looking at Bruce. His entire focus was on Lucy, and the expression on his face was one Bruce recognized, because he'd seen it in the mirror for 6 years. Desperation to help someone who was suffering. Bruce's hand shot out and grabbed Tom's wrist. Not violently, but firmly, A warning and a restraint all at once. "You've got 5 seconds to explain yourself," Bruce said quietly. The kind of quiet that was more threatening than shouting. Tom looked up at him. Those sharp eyes that had seen too much for a 10-year-old, meeting Bruce's without flinching. "There's something stuck in her ear," Tom said, speaking fast but clearly. "A blockage, deep in the canal. I can see it from here when the light hits right. It's been there a long time. That's why she keeps touching it. That's why she tilts her head. I've helped with this before. I know what to do. Please, just let me try." Bruce stared at him. His grip on Tom's wrist didn't loosen, but something shifted in his expression. Doubt, maybe, or desperate hope wearing the disguise of skepticism. Lucy stood there between them, unaware of the tension, her hand once again drifting to her ear. Bruce made his decision. He didn't release Tom's wrist. Not yet, but he stepped aside just enough to give the boy a narrow path to his daughter. What happened in the next 10 seconds would either end in a homeless boy getting hurt, or a miracle no one saw coming. Tom moved slowly, deliberately, every motion telegraphed and careful, as if approaching a frightened animal. Lucy watched him with curious eyes, her head tilted in that familiar way, completely unaware that the next 30 seconds would change her entire world. "I need to look in her ear," Tom said softly, more to Bruce than to Lucy. "I won't hurt her. I promise." Bruce's grip on Tom's wrist tightened for just a moment. A final warning, a final hesitation, and then loosened slightly. Not a release. Just enough slack for Tom to move. Tom knelt down, bringing himself to Lucy's eye level. He smiled at her, tried to look reassuring despite his nervousness. Lucy smiled back, innocent and trusting in the way only children can be. "Ah," Tom whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "This might feel weird for a second, but I'm going to help you, okay?" Lucy's eyes searched his face, reading his expression the way she'd learned to read the world, through sight alone, through the shape of mouths and the softness of eyes. Tom leaned in closer. His right hand came up, fingers extended, approaching Lucy's right ear with the kind of precision that seemed impossible for a 10-year-old boy. But Tom had learned precision from necessity. When you survive by helping others, you learn to be gentle, to be careful, to do no harm. Bruce stood over them both, his body coiled tight as a spring, his hand still wrapped around Tom's wrist. One wrong move, one indication that this kid meant harm. One cry from Lucy, and Bruce would pull him away so fast the boy's feet would leave the ground. But Tom's fingers were steady. He tilted Lucy's head just slightly, angling it to catch the afternoon sunlight. And there it was, the dark mass, visible now that he was close enough. Hardened wax and debris compacted over years, lodged deep against her eardrum like a cork in a bottle. Tom's index finger and thumb moved into position. Slow, careful. His touch was feather-light as he made contact with the obstruction. Lucy's eyes widened slightly at the sensation. Foreign, strange, but not painful. Bruce's breathing stopped entirely. His grip tightened again on Tom's wrist, knuckles white, ready to yank the boy back at the first sign of distress from his daughter. Tom began to pull. Not roughly, not quickly, just steady, gentle pressure, easing the mass free from where it had been wedged for who knows how long. Seconds stretched into eternity. The obstruction resisted at first, held in place by years of compression. Tom adjusted his angle slightly, his young face a mask of concentration, his bottom lip caught between his teeth. And then it moved. The thick, compact mass began to slide free, millimeter by millimeter, drawn out by Tom's careful extraction. It was larger than Bruce expected, darker, coated in old wax and debris that had accumulated and hardened into something that looked almost solid. Tom held it in his fingers for just a moment. Proof, evidence, the answer to 6 years of medical failures. And then it fell away. Silence. A beat of absolute nothing. Lucy stood completely still, her eyes unfocused, her expression frozen somewhere between confusion and fear. Something had changed. Something fundamental. Something she couldn't yet name. And then her breath hitched. A sharp, sudden intake of air that had nothing to do with breathing and everything to do with shock. Her eyes widened, pupils dilating. Her entire body went rigid with the overwhelming sensation of sound flooding into her consciousness for the first time in her life. The breeze rustled through the oak trees at the edge of the park, leaves whispering secrets she'd never heard before. Children laughed on the far side of the playground, their voices carrying across the open space like bells. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, sharp and clear and real. Bruce exhaled sharply, a sound of tension and disbelief and desperate hope all mixed together. And Lucy heard all. Her hands flew to her ears, both of them, as if trying to confirm that the sensation was real. Her lips trembled, her chin quivered. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and fast and unstoppable. She looked up at her father, this man she'd known her entire life but had never truly heard, and her voice came out cracked and broken and more beautiful than any sound Bruce had ever heard in his life. "Daddy," she whispered, the words shaped by memory but heard for the very first time. "I hear you." Bruce, Iron Hand. Maddox had been in bar fights that left men unconscious. He'd ridden through thunderstorms that turned highways into rivers. He'd buried brothers who died too young and stood at gravesides without shedding a tear, because that's what being strong meant in his world. But hearing his daughter say, "I hear you," for the first time in her life, that broke him completely. His knees went weak, actually weak. The toughest man in Nevada felt his legs tremble beneath him, felt the ground shift like he'd been hit with something he couldn't fight back against. He released Tom's wrist, forgot he was even holding it, and dropped into a crouch in front of Lucy. His hands reached for her face, needing to see her eyes, needing to confirm this was real. Lucy's hands were still pressed against her ears, fingers trembling, her entire body vibrating with the overwhelming sensation of a world that had suddenly become alive with sound. Every rustle, every breath, every footstep on gravel in the parking lot. "Daddy," she said again, and this time she heard herself say it. Her own voice. The sound shocked her so much she gasped, which made another sound, which made her gasp again. She started crying, not from pain or fear, but from the sheer magnitude of everything flooding into her consciousness at once. "I can hear," she whispered, testing the words, hearing them vibrate in her throat and emerge into the air as something real, something she could perceive. "Daddy, I can hear. I can hear me. I can hear you. I can hear everything." Her voice rose with each word, climbing from whisper to speaking volume, as if she needed to test the full range of what sound meant. And Bruce, this hardened man who'd spent decades building walls around his emotions, felt every single one of those walls crumble into dust. Tears poured down his face. Not quiet tears, not dignified ones, but the kind that come from somewhere deep in the chest, from a place that holds 6 years of helplessness and frustration and watching your child struggle with something you couldn't fix no matter how hard you tried. He pulled Lucy into his arms and held her so tight it probably hurt. But she didn't complain. She pressed her ear against his chest and listened to his heartbeat, actually heard it for the first time in her life. "The leaves," she said, her voice muffled against his leather jacket. "Daddy, the leaves are making noise. And the wind. And that dog. Is that a dog?" Bruce couldn't speak. His throat had closed completely. All he could do was nod and hold her and cry in a way he hadn't cried since he was a child himself. And then he remembered Tom. Bruce looked up, his vision blurred with tears, and found the boy standing a few feet away. Tom had backed up after the extraction, giving them space, his bare feet shifting nervously on the dusty ground. His face carried an expression Bruce had seen before on the faces of combat veterans. The look of someone who'd just done something impossible and couldn't quite process it themselves. 6 years, thousands of dollars, dozens of specialists with impressive degrees and expensive equipment and access to the latest medical technology. And a barefoot 10-year-old boy did what none of them could. Bruce stood slowly, still holding Lucy against his chest with one arm. He looked at Tom, really looked at him, seeing not just a homeless kid, but someone who'd just fundamentally altered the course of his daughter's entire life. When Bruce finally spoke, his voice shook in a way none of his bikers had ever heard. Not from anger, not from intimidation, but from gratitude so profound it changed the texture of every word. Kid, Bruce breathed, barely getting the word out. You changed my little girl's life. Tom shrugged slightly, almost apologetically, his eyes dropping to the ground. I just wanted to help, he said quietly. Bruce wiped his face with the back of his hand, smearing tears across weathered skin. And in that moment, looking at this skinny, barefoot boy who'd given him a miracle, Bruce made a decision that would change 3 lives forever. Bruce didn't think. There was no internal debate, no weighing of options or consideration of consequences. Some decisions bypass the mind entirely and come straight from somewhere deeper, from the gut, from the heart, from whatever part of a person recognizes truth when it stands in front of them. This was one of those decisions. Bruce looked at Tom, this child who'd spent 2 years surviving alone, who'd approached a stranger's daughter despite every instinct telling him to stay invisible, who'd risked everything to help someone he didn't know, and saw something he recognized. He saw someone worth protecting. Bruce's hands moved to his shoulders, fingers finding the worn leather of his Hell's Angels vest. The cut, as they called it. The sacred garment that represented everything he was, everything he'd earned over decades of loyalty and brotherhood. It was warm from the Nevada sun, heavy with the weight of patches and pins and memories stitched into every inch of leather. He lifted it off. The movement was slow, deliberate, ceremonial, like removing a crown to place it on another's head. Tom watched with wide eyes, not understanding what was happening, his body tensing as if preparing to run. Bruce stepped forward, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. And then he draped the vest over Tom's small shoulders. The leather swallowed the boy. It hung past his waist, the arm holes gaping, the bottom hem nearly reaching his knees. Tom stood there frozen, his thin frame barely filling a quarter of the space that Bruce's broad shoulders had occupied moments before. But the weight of it, the actual physical weight of leather and history and belonging, settled onto Tom's shoulders like an anchor, like something solid in a world that had been weightless and uncertain for too long. You're not alone anymore, Bruce said, his voice rough but steady now, each word carefully placed like stones building a foundation. You stay with us now. Tom's lips parted, but no sound came out. His eyes went glassy with tears he was trying desperately not to shed. His hands came up slowly, fingers touching the leather as if it might disappear if he moved too quickly. I can't. Tom's voice cracked completely. I'm nobody. I'm just. You're my daughter's miracle, Bruce interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. That makes you family. And family doesn't sleep on park benches. Family doesn't go hungry. Family doesn't survive. Family lives. You understand me? Tom nodded, though his face suggested he didn't quite believe what was happening. Kids who've been abandoned learned not to trust good things. Learned that kindness usually came with conditions, with expectations, with expiration dates. But there was something in Bruce's eyes, something unshakable and absolute, that cut through Tom's defenses like a blade through paper. Lucy pulled away from her father just enough to look at Tom, her face still wet with tears, but lit up with joy that made her look like she was glowing from the inside. You're staying? She asked, her voice full of wonder and hope, testing this new ability to hear her own questions. Tom looked down at her, then back at Bruce, then down at the vest, drowning his small frame. I'm staying, he whispered, and saying it out loud made it feel real in a way nothing had felt real in 2 years. Bruce placed his hand on top of Tom's head, the gesture somewhere between a blessing and a claim. This boy was his now, his responsibility, his family. We'll get you cleaned up, Bruce said, his mind already moving through logistics. Get you fed, get you home. Home. Tom had forgotten what that word meant. 6 months later, evening had become Tom's favorite time of day. Not because of the food, though Bruce's cooking was better than anything Tom had eaten in years. Not because of the warm bed, though sleeping on an actual mattress instead of park benches still felt like a luxury. It was because of the sound lessons. Every evening after dinner, Lucy would sit cross-legged on the living room floor, and Tom would join her. And for 30 minutes, She would teach him about the world she was discovering. "Close your eyes," Lucy would say, her voice still carrying that wonder of someone who'd only recently learned what her own voice sounded like. Tom would close his eyes, and Lucy would make sounds. The crinkle of paper, the tap of a spoon against glass, the rustle of fabric, the snap of fingers, the whistle of wind through a crack in the window. "What's that one?" she'd ask. And Tom would guess. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always playing along, because watching Lucy light up with joy every time she heard something new was worth any amount of embarrassment. She was teaching him to hear the way she heard, with fresh ears, with wonder, with the knowledge that sound was a gift, not a given. Bruce would watch from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, a small smile on his weathered face. His daughter had her hearing. His son, because that's what Tom was now, legally and in every way that mattered, had a home. Tom had gained weight. His ribs no longer showed through his shirts. His hair was clean and trimmed. He wore clothes that fit. He went to school. He had friends. But more than that, he had Lucy. And Lucy had him. It happened on a Tuesday evening in March. They were in the backyard. Lucy was on the swing set Bruce had installed 2 months earlier. The one she'd asked for because she wanted to hear the chains creak when she swung high. Tom was pushing her the way Bruce used to listening to her laugh. That sound that still made Bruce's chest tighten with gratitude every single time he heard it. Lucy was swinging higher, her red dress catching the wind, her hair flying behind her. She was singing loudly, off-key, completely unashamed, because she could finally hear music and wanted to add her voice to it. Tom gave her another push, smiling at her enthusiasm. And then Lucy turned her head mid-swing, looked back at Tom with her eyes bright and full and overflowing with something she'd been learning about in the stories Bruce read to her every night. And she screamed it at the top of her lungs, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "I love you, Tom." The words hit him like a physical force. Tom's hands froze mid-push. His breath caught in his throat. His entire body went still. In 2 years of being homeless, in 3 years since his mother died, in all the time since his father abandoned him, no one had said those words to him. Not once. And now, this little girl, this miracle he'd helped create, was shouting it for the world to hear. Tom's vision blurred. Tears spilled over before he could stop them. His chest heaved with a sob he'd been holding in for years. Lucy jumped off the swing mid-motion, landed in the grass, and ran to him. She threw her small arms around his waist and held on tight. "I love you," she said again, quieter this time, her voice muffled against his shirt. "You gave me sound. You gave me everything. I love you." Tom dropped to his knees and hugged her back, his whole body shaking with tears he'd kept locked away for so long they'd turned into something heavy and sharp. "I love you too," he whispered, his voice breaking on every word. Bruce stood on the back porch, watching them, his own eyes wet. And he made another decision. 3 years later, the Hells Angels Nevada chapter clubhouse was packed. Not just with bikers, but with families, social workers, city council members, news cameras. Bruce stood at a makeshift podium, just a wooden crate, really, wearing his vest again. Tom's had been resized, fitted properly, and now hung on the teenager's broader shoulders in the corner of the room. Beside Tom stood Lucy, now 9 years old, wearing headphones and grinning because she still loved hearing music more than anything else in the world. 3 years ago, Bruce began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd learned to speak truth. "A homeless boy saved my daughter. Not because he wanted something from me, not because he expected anything in return, but because he saw someone suffering and he knew he could help." He paused, looking at Tom, who shifted uncomfortably under the attention. "That boy taught me something. He taught me that the most vulnerable among us, the ones society forgets, they see things we miss. They understand pain we've never felt. And sometimes they carry gifts we desperately need." Bruce gestured to the room. "So we created Tom's Law. Not an actual law, not yet, but a code. A commitment from every Hells Angels chapter in Nevada, and now 3 other clubs who've joined us. We find homeless kids. We help them. We give them what Tom gave Lucy, a chance." The room erupted in applause. On the wall behind Bruce hung a board with photographs. 47 children, 47 faces, each one with a story, each one found by bikers who'd learned to see the invisible. 17 had been reunited with family. 22 had been placed in foster homes vetted and supported by the clubs. 8, including Tom, had been adopted directly by club members. 0 had been left behind. Family isn't blood, Bruce said, his voice thick with emotion. Family is who shows up when you need them most. Family is who sees you when everyone else looks away. Family is leather and chrome and knowing that no kid, not one, will sleep on a park bench in our city if we can help it. More applause. Louder this time. Tom stepped forward, Bruce's hand on his shoulder. I was nobody, Tom said quietly, though the microphone carried his voice. I was invisible. And then I met Lucy, and she gave me something even more important than I gave her. He looked at Bruce, then at Lucy. She gave me a family who taught me that being seen is the greatest gift anyone can give. Epilogue. 5 years after that Tuesday in the park, Lucy stood on stage at her middle school talent show. She'd chosen to sing. Of course she had. Tom sat in the front row, Bruce beside him, both wearing their Hell's Angels vests. Around them sat 17 other club members, all foster or adoptive fathers now, all wearing their cuts with pride. Behind them sat 47 children who'd been found, helped, and given homes. Lucy's voice filled the auditorium, still slightly off-key, still beautifully imperfect, but heard, always heard. Tom closed his eyes and listened, the way Lucy had taught him all those years ago, and smiled. Because sometimes miracles wear leather. Sometimes heroes are barefoot and homeless. Sometimes family is forged in 30 seconds of courage. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply seeing them when everyone else looks away. If this story moved you, remember, every invisible child deserves to be seen. Every homeless kid deserves a home. Every Tom deserves a Bruce. Every Lucy deserves her miracle. Share this story if you believe real families are built on love, not blood. Comment, family wears leather, if bikers who protect the vulnerable are the real heroes. Subscribe for more stories that prove angels come in all forms, even on Harleys.